Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining our conversation today between Dr. Sheila Hassell Hughes from Human Energy, and Trace Bell, and myself, Tina Olson from the Whole On Institute. I will do just a very, very quick high-level introduction, which is that I think I'll say it this way. When Dr. Sheila and I got to meet and have coffee in real life, which is just such a joyful thing these days when so many of our connections are virtual, we quickly found that what the Whole On Institute cares about, which is truly reconnecting people to themselves, each other, nature, and mystery, because we feel like the meta crisis is a crisis of disconnection at its core. And so through that, we have a lot of different ways we teach, different frameworks we look through. And one of those frameworks, integral theory or spiral dynamics, is very aligned with what human energy uses, which is a three-part story of the human experience that I'll ask Dr. Sheila to go into. But the bottom line is that human energy also is about, at its core, what are these connections that humans are creating through direct relationship, through technology, through myth and story, through science. And so at the end of the day, it's in some ways it's different flavors of the same ice cream. And who doesn't love spending a nice hot summer day with some ice cream? So that's why we're all here together. So Dr. Sheila, would you be willing to start with just a high-level overview of what these three stories are? What I'm thinking is that we'll spend the first chunk of time talking about what human energy is about and what these stories are and how we get to the noosphere. And then we'll spend the second chunk of time talking about how it's impacted you and also the people who you've gotten a chance to teach this to, which is one of the things that personally lights me up the most,
Sure.
hearing about it. And then the third part, how we can all participate, both what you have going on in the pipeline and also what human energy's vision is for inviting people into the movement. So we'll go ahead and start with the first, which is, will you kind of lay out both what human energy is and also what these stories are that have gotten us to where we're at today?
Sure, my pleasure. And let me just start off by thanking you for inviting me to this conversation today. We are all about connecting and broadening our connections. So this is a very welcome conversation. And I will say that hearing your um, overview of kind of the connections that you see makes me think, oh, yes, that actually came through. That was clear. So I'm glad to know that made sense to you and resonated for you in the way that it did for me. Um,
Mm.
so first of all, just very briefly, Human Energy is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We started as a project of the Kasira Family Foundation, and we spun off as our own nonprofit organization in 2021. So we're still pretty young, and we have been very experimental, really a startup, and we're transitioning into becoming a more fully operational organization as we go forward. We just have our first strategic plan. Sorry, I've got something in my eye here. And excited about that. And I was appointed CEO in February, but have been with the organization for quite a few years. In our new strategic plan, we articulated our mission a little bit differently. So we framed that as serving as a catalytic hub for evolving collective consciousness. And our vision is of a future where humanity is consciously evolving towards its full collective potential in harmony with technology and the planet. And so those pieces are kind of all a part of what we do. And you mentioned kind of these three stories. So I'll start with that because it's one of the kind of core pillars of our work and our approach. And this was really sort of the genius of our dear founder, Ben Kasira, who launched this project and the organization initially. So we think of the first story as being ancient stories, mythic stories that have given a sense of grand scale, even cosmic orientation to people and peoples, to communities for millennia. Stories that tell us who we are, where we came from, where we're going, what our purpose is, and as a result, sort of what we owe to each other and how we belong to each other and to the planet. So those have been religious stories, mythic stories, indigenous origin stories. And many of those stories have been destabilized or have become less central to masses of people through the onset of the Enlightenment and the rise of science, and in particularly evolution, which says, actually, this is where we come from in a scientific sense. So from the Big Bang to the origins of humans, our ape ancestors and all of that, like, what does that mean, right? And we see this tension. I mean, there are still people in the US, many, who deny evolution and believe the earth is 7,000 years old, and et cetera, et cetera. So there is this tension often between first and second stories, and they've sometimes been pitted against each other. The second story of science is one that we understand to be sort of a highly materialistic and deterministic and purposeless or story that suggests that evolution is purely random, that humans are a purely random occurrence with no particular meaning or purpose, and that we don't know where we're going or how we'll get there, and it's just a matter of random selection. So these two stories have been somewhat pitted against each other. And what we offer through an understanding of the noosphere as the evolution of all that is, and of humanity, and of collective consciousness, is a story that endeavors to bridge those two, that brings the sense of meaning and purpose that first stories have long offered, and that is firmly founded on scientific knowledge and evidence. So I used to think, when I first encountered this, I used to think, oh, first, then second, then third. And I found that I struggled with that, because as a person of faith, I still am invested in a particular first story that lends meaning and purpose to my life. I haven't abandoned it. I understand it to be not a literal explanation of human origins, but it holds meaning for me. But more recently, I've come to understand, I think, actually a better and probably the original way of thinking about the third story, which is kind of like a third way, right? It's a way between divine manipulation of human life and a totally random scientific interpretation of evolution. That is, that evolution has a direction. This was a key principle that Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, the French Jesuit paleontologist, geologist, philosopher, theologian, came upon, which is that evolution is always in the direction of greater complexity, from the first particles of the Big Bang to single-celled organisms, to multi-celled organisms, to first life forms to crawl upon the earth, to humans, that we're always moving in the direction of greater complexity. And this is where his distinct contribution really comes into play, that complexity ultimately gives rise to consciousness, and with more complexity, higher forms of consciousness. And so we can think about humans in some sense as being the thinking layer of the earth, as the key contributors to the noosphere, the evolution of the planet, of life, from the geosphere to the biosphere to the noosphere, the thinking layer, the level of consciousness that we all participate in.
I love
I'm
that.
curious. I want to touch into the three stories, and I'm curious in your work
Yeah,
and the work the human energy does in the world.
yeah.
Have you what have you observed about people who are like firmly planted in either like the first story or the second story, and then they're opening up to the third story? Like, are there um certain experiences that people have, or there's certain things that happen in people's lives? I'm curious just your observations
Mm,
about people's evolution into that third story, whether they be at that firmly planted in that first story or that second
yeah.
story, or maybe you
Well,
can talk about your own evolution through those.
yeah, well, that's a lot. Um, I will say that, you know, this integrative worldview, which is one way of talking about this story and the noosphere, requires some flexibility of thought, right? And so it requires one to open oneself um, to new ways of thinking. And some people just aren't open to that from both perspectives. But I think for people who are striving to reconcile attention, those are the people who are open to, oh, this, I don't have to actually live in this bifurcated way. I don't actually have to reject what I'm learning about science or divorce myself from a sense of meaning or purpose that I was raised with or that I long for, in order to have integrity is another way of thinking about it, right?
Mm.
Um, so, and there are people who come to human energy from who are highly religious and who are not religious at all, who find ways to um, to engage deeply and to make sense of the purposeful story that this offers. I'll give you one example of one of my students, and I know Tina wanted to talk about students later, which I can do, but I was reading through some of the comments that students made in a course I teach about the three stories, an interdisciplinary undergraduate course at St. Mary's College, where I remain on the faculty. And I'm remembering one student in particular who um, Kate, she's given us permission to share her comments and her story, who grew up very in a very vibrant religious community, and I don't the Protestant denomination. I don't know the details of it, but her father was a pastor, and kind of youth group, and this big, vibrant church community was sort of her whole center of social of life and where she got her sense of purpose from. And she was in college and she was studying these things and trying to, figure out what this meant for her. And she wrote in her final reflection on the course, I was worried that this course would make me question my faith. At the beginning of the course, I got nervous. And that's not what happened at all. Instead, I grew into a sense of reconciliation and integration that made me understand, have a bigger picture for that. And she talked about at the end of the course sitting down with her pastor father, who she thought was going to like judge and reject her, and having this really beautiful conversation where she shared what she was learning, and he was really open to it. So just one example, but obviously there's a range of perspectives. I will say one of the things I have taught in that course is about the Creation Museum, and I have colleagues who do research on the Creation Museum, and that's kind of mind-boggling for some of my students. But for people who are stuck in one story and unwilling to move outside of it, that's a hard sell.
Mm. Mm. It's so
And
fascinating.
sorry, I'll add one more
Yep, go
comment, which
ahead.
is
Yeah.
really, I think this three-story model was the brainchild of our founder, Ben, who was raised Catholic in Iraq, was Jesuit educated, and was a young science student in college and went to one of his Jesuit priests saying, I don't know what to do. I can't reconcile these things, and thought he was going to be judged, for sort of having this crisis of faith. And the priest said to him, here, have you ever read Teilhard? And that's the origins of human energy.
Mm. I absolutely love the posture towards, because the whole theory is based upon the truth of increasing complexity. The posture is, there's room here for you. You don't have to. In our work, we talk a lot about the difference between the concept of transcend and include versus transcend and repress.
Mm,
And as we continue to learn and evolve, there are some things we want to let go of. There are things that don't work for us
yes.
anymore. And also through that transcending process of encountering new complexity and having to metabolize it in one way or another, we can choose a transcend where we absolutely repress everything that has come before, but that tends to lead to a lot of unhealth, both internally in the psyche, in the body, in relationships. It
Mhm.
doesn't, bottom line is, it doesn't work. You
Yeah.
can attempt to do it for so long, but we can only fragment ourselves so much. And I think we see that in the micro in our own bodies or our own relationships, but we also, of course, see that in the macro of the version, the shadow side of the scientific story that says that that the word abundance actually just means that we can extract endlessly from a planet that has finite boundaries and finite
Mhm.
resources. And so that the idea I see coming through so clearly is your invitation through the stories, through human energy, and through the classes that you're teaching to transcend and include and invite people in and say, hey, whatever version of this is working for the level of complexity, we're all dealing with different complexity at any moment in life and different particulars of that complexity. So I'd love for you to talk about that a little bit further, including some of the people you shared with me and whichever ones you feel called to share. You shared with me a couple students who encountered their own versions of complexity or new questions or a fork in the
Mhm.
road in their own lives, and then got a
Mhm.
chance to
Mhm.
take your course and had some real awakenings, if you will, through that process.
Sure. It's interesting. Your reflection on this, Tina, makes me think of um, a framework that I used in my scholarship in my former life. And it's so interesting to me how I keep discovering things I've done, things I've learned, things I've struggled through in different phases of my life and my career. Every day I'm like, oh, that's so relevant here. Um,
Mm,
and I feel like I really feel like and I can talk about this later, but like I'm blossoming in this place because of all that has
mm-hmm,
come before. And what this reminds me of is a model that I was using for understanding the relationship to religion and to gender in the work of my favorite author, Louise Erdrich, who is an Ojibwe American writer um, who's very prolific, written many, many novels about um, an Ojibwe or Anishinaabe fictionalized reservation in North Dakota and the white community surrounding it, and many of the characters and storylines overlap and intersect and return over a span of more than a dozen novels. And in one particular novel, which is about a Catholic priest serving on this reservation in the early decades of the 20th century, who it is discovered partway through is actually a woman in disguise, um, is the model that Anishinaabe, the Anishinaabe worldview presents of incorporation rather than conversion.
mm,
And
mm,
so there's this idea that one can incorporate multiple genders and multiple experiences in one's life and have integrity. And that one can incorporate multiple religious practices and spiritual perspectives in one's life and have integrity. And so the tension with the Catholic Church around, no, you must convert, you must turn away from, as opposed to what's often been called syncretism, right? This kind of, we will blend these things together in a way that works for us and that makes meaning, and that makes sense for our particular location and history and experience. And so I'm just that idea of conversion versus incorporation. Also, like, an incorporative attitude, right? Like Anishinaabe adopted all kinds of people into their tribe and into their families, as opposed to necessarily rejecting. And having come from and been raised in an evangelical tradition myself, a Canadian one, so slightly soft, as the spectrum goes. But I've thought a lot about the way that we use exclusion and rejection to draw boundaries and to define ourselves. And this integrative worldview is all about crossing those boundaries. It's about acknowledging and understanding the complexity of the interconnections of all life and all experience, and based in scientific fact, right? Like it's this is what is, and open yourself to that and begin to see how this pattern of complexity works in your life. I feel like there's parts of your question I totally forgot. Oh, you asked about some students.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll give one example. So, Kellen, who also agreed to share his story, he's actually a member of our Next Generation Advisory Board, which I love, that I get to work with these young people, current and recent college students, and be mentored by them as we mentor them. Shared that he, when he took my course, he was, I think, a sophomore, and he'd come to college as an athlete. He was an elite long distance runner. And that was his whole kind of identity, was athlete, student athlete, and had been for many years. And then he suffered an injury that curtailed his athletic career. And he was really struggling to find his place and figure out who he was going to be and where he wanted to go with his life. And he was a curious guy, and he was taking classes. He was a psychology major. He is a psychology major. He says he'll be a senior this coming year, but also taking some philosophy courses. And then he was intrigued by this January term sort of elective course I was offering. And he was amazing. He, like sat in the front row every day with these eyes so wide, and just really, really thoughtful, contributed a great deal to the course, and wrote at the end that he discovered a new purpose for his life. And that purpose was to be a curious human being. And he, in particular, loved the way we read chapter 10 from Teilhard de Chardin's Future of Man, which is a very dense chapter in which Teilhard lays out the theory of the noosphere biologically. And I made them read this thing, these poor undergraduates. And we spent a fair bit of time working through it, and they were drawing pictures on the whiteboard of what they thought this meant and all of this. But he really loved the way Teilhard talked about the role of research. And this is something we're coming at from various angles in human energy as a function of consciousness that technology allows for. Essentially, as we evolve towards greater complexity, and as technology allows us to offload certain kinds of tasks and skills, it frees up intellectual capacity. Now, we can talk about AI and what it's doing for and to our minds if you're interested in that, we have a lot going on in human energy around that. But the basic principle that the technology frees up human energy. And that Teilhard theorized that research was one of the primary, if not the primary area that technology allowed us to offload physical, mundane, survivalist kinds of tasks to, so that we could evolve into higher thought, and that research was this endeavor that was going to cover the globe and inform everything we do, which arguably has happened. He was writing this in 1950-ish. And Kellen was like, my purpose is to be a curious human and to do research. And he's since become very active in psychology research, but informed by philosophy and the noosphere and all of these other things. And it just lit him up inside that, like, this is a human calling. This is what I'm called for, what I'm made for, and this is an essentially human activity. But it's just a really beautiful thing to see, and he's a wonderful guy. Came to our conference in Morocco with us this last year and just had a great time.
There's something that it does to my spirit to know how engaging this invitation is to young people, because it is so easy to go online or on social media or even out into the world and hear people bemoaning the state of affairs, which is it's a very true and real part of the human experience that we're going through some level of system collapse right now. And so to have there be such an available, like rooted, grounded new home for people to be welcomed into, it doesn't mean, like, when we have a lot of love and care and energy within us, that's actually when we can grieve and let go and do that transcend and include process. We tend to, if we're on survival mode, we tend to not be able to think that we have the luxury of stopping and actually feeling and contemplating and being with the change. And so there's something that just is so real within my spirit about the fact that we're doing this work to invite people to a new place, not to bypass the very real collapse that is occurring or this radical exponential increase in complexity that might feel very hard to integrate in a way that makes you still feel like you're sane. But it's like, as that's happening, you're safe to do it, because there is this story of where we're all headed together that is compelling people across generations to want to be a part of it and to want to participate. And I think that's the thing that just really lights my spirit up. So we probably could ping pong on this for a while, but I do want to give Trace a chance to ask another question.
Yeah, there's so many questions. There's so much I want to dive into about young people's relationship with the content you teach and the noosphere. I want to make sure we get to the noosphere itself. So I would love for you to just explain briefly what the noosphere is and why this is such a critical thing for us to understand at this moment in time.
Yeah, sure. I will say this is our biggest challenge as an organization is we're dealing with complexity. We're about complexity, and the noosphere is a complex thing. And so figuring out how to, what our elevator pitch is, how to convey this in sound bites is really challenging, although we're getting better at it. I mean, in a nutshell, the noosphere is the planetary sphere of shared thought and consciousness. So, as I mentioned, Teilhard was a geologist, a paleontologist, as well as a philosopher and theologian. The other kind of key thinker who with him coined the term noosphere was Vladimir Vernadsky, the Russian geochemist. And they had slightly different takes on it. I mean, they both understood it to be this evolutionary phase of the planet Earth, and a result of the human species evolving to collective consciousness. Vernadsky had a more, as you might expect from his Russian background, and he was more focused on geopolitics, and he had a less, certainly didn't have the theological perspective that Teilhard brought to it. And human energy is not a theological organization, and we are more focused on the science, but we are certainly open to and try to integrate, understand that all of these things are connected. Teilhard was a scientist who loved, I've just watched a beautiful documentary. It was Emmy Award nominated, called Teilhard, and his name is spelled Teilhard. His full name is Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, but he's referred to as Teilhard. PBS did a beautiful documentary, full length, called Teilhard, Visionary Scientist. And I just watched it this last week. It was nominated for an Emmy. And what's clear in that and other things I've read about him as a person was that he loved the earth. He loved matter. And he was not willing to engage in a bifurcation of matter and spirit. And the noosphere for him was a way of explaining how spirit is essentially inherent in all matter, that it must evolve, that the potentiality for consciousness, in his view, is in those first particles, right? Where else has it come from? But through increasing complexity, consciousness becomes possible. And one way of thinking about it is that the earth becomes aware of itself, the planet becomes aware of itself through human collective thought. So we can think about it in an evolutionary frame, from the geosphere giving rise to the biosphere, and the biosphere gives rise to humanity, which ultimately gives rise to the noosphere. People have different opinions about when the noosphere first began. Our wonderful resident cosmologist, Brian Swim, might suggest that it began with the Big Bang. And our neuroscientist and neuroanthropologist, Terry Deacon, would say it began with the emergence of symbolic language. And so with symbolic language, thought begins to exist outside of an individual mind, right? This is the means by which thought exists in a space between us that is shared, that is mutually constructed, that we both can access, and importantly, can pass down. So in this chapter 10 that I referred to from The Future of Man, Teilhard talks about evolution being having a genetic heredity, being having a genetic component, but then through symbolic language, heredity also becomes cultural, and we pass down our knowledge and our culture through our symbols, through our institutions, through our symbolic practices. And that begins to build this layer of knowledge that we have access to. The libraries are part of the noosphere. Pictographs are part of the noosphere. The internet, which arguably Teilhard foresaw. He was very interested in the development of computers and was writing about the coming integrated computer systems and communication systems in the 1950s. Don't know that he anticipated AI, but these are all increasingly complex versions of communication technology, and language, symbolic language, is the first significant complex communication technology, right? That develop the noosphere. So some people also talk about the noosphere as like a future thing that we're evolving towards. So yes, it is continuing to evolve, and we have not fully realized it yet. But I think we're pretty unanimous in that we are participating in it and contributing to it. So the internet and AI are sort of modern, obvious manifestations, but it's not, and they highlight the ways that technology um, uh, lends complexity and acceleration to the evolution of the noosphere. Um, but they're not the birth of the noosphere. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that's fantastic. Um, I'm curious. Well, there's so many things streaming, and of course we could go for 2 more hours. Um, one of the things that I'm most curious about is, do you and or human energy and or Tayard, whichever lens you'd love to take it through, have a perspective of like the quality of thought and therefore
Mm.
like the contribution to the noosphere with regard to that? Because I imagine like clearly, as you know, there's a dead internet theory, which is about like so many bots are controlling so many things and it's not even
Sure.
people
Yeah.
contributing.
Yeah.
Like I'm curious for you to jump into that a little bit.
Sure. Sure. Yes, and I think that's very relevant to the conversations about AI as well.
Mhm.
So the noosphere is a fact. Um, the noosphere can be healthy
Mhm.
or not. And for us to realize a noosphere that contributes to the ongoing and improving flourishing of humanity and the planet, which is why our vision, right? Our vision statement of a future where humanity is consciously evolving um, with in harmony with technology and the planet. Um, that there's no guarantee that we
Mm.
will have a future noosphere that is pro-social, that is pro-human.
Mhm.
We are, and this is one of the pieces also that really engages my students. We are in charge. We are the ones who are creating technology. We are the ones who are directing technology. We are the ones who are using technology. We are the ones, as a recent book who suggests, who are raising AI, right? Who are teaching AI how to be. And it is on us how we want to shape the future. We, for the first time, a species is actually shaping its own evolution and the evolution of the
Mhm.
planet. We need to be aware of that. We need to be conscious and deliberate about that. We need to work collectively and collaboratively across personal, national, cultural borders to address this in a planetary way, to address planetary scale problems that require us thinking outside of those narrow, fragmented modes that you were speaking to earlier. And so, you know, our one of our latest projects is on the coevolution of humanity and AI, and looking at AI as potentially the catalyst for a major evolutionary transition. Will we make that transition successfully or not? That is not determined.
Mhm.
Um, Sometimes evolutionary transitions, which are the points where the level of complexity and collaboration moves to a higher level and a new way of being and interacting, a new organism even, or superorganism emerges, right? Like a new quality of humanity emerges and frees up again, like suddenly new ways, new synergies, new possibilities emerge. Will that happen? Maybe not. What can we
Mhm.
learn from? So we actually have a documentary under development, and our next salon, global salon that we'll be hosting here in the Bay Area in October, are focused on this question. What can we learn from major evolutionary transitions throughout deep history? And what lessons can we draw from that for facilitating a successful evolutionary transition to a higher level of human thought and consciousness with AI that is in harmony with technology and the planet and promotes human flourishing?
Mm, that's so powerful. And it leads me to one more question, but I actually want to give this question to Trace as an option. And then if you don't want to run with it, Trace, you can go in a different direction because I think we probably have time for this one last one. And then we definitely want to make sure to get to what human energy is up to these days, and also an opportunity for the lovely people who've joined us in person today, or, in real time, I suppose, to ask some questions. So what it makes me think of is Trace has talked about for years, has talked about how his belief is that AI, and now that it's here, is going to open up deep possibilities for human creativity and for humans to get to do
Mm,
human things.
yeah.
And you mentioned that earlier. So I'd love to toss that over to you, Trace, if you want to elaborate on that, or if you want to go in a different direction.
Yeah, thank you, Tina. I was thinking about in the context of the internet, how the internet both uh, enhance the noosphere in some really important ways. Like we're able to have this conversation right now because of the internet, but then you also have, like dead internet theory, like Tina was talking about, misinformation campaigns, information warfare. I'm curious about your perspective on like the internet was a major technology that really impacted the noosphere. Are there particular lessons and things we can learn from the internet in how we approach AI as it relates to the noosphere?
Yes. Um, and and I will admit this is not like I'm trained as a humanist. This is not my area of expertise.
Hmm.
I am learning from amazing scientists and systems theorists and computer scientists and all of it. So I don't speak on this with any particular disciplinary expertise. But from what I've observed and from what I've learned from my wonderful colleagues, yes, and maybe rather than talk about the internet broadly, I'll talk about social media in particular. And I think with my students, we watch a little bit of um, the a video with Tristan Harris called "Beyond the AI Dilemma," where he's saying like, "Look, we screwed it up with social media. We did it wrong. We can't get it wrong with AI. The stakes are high. Here's all the things we learned, all the ways we didn't regulate, all the ways we didn't attend to the humane, all the ways we didn't protect our kids, you know. So I think that as kind of those lessons about um, ignoring what actually contributes to human flourishing and social well-being have to be taken into account. Um, I'm really interested in the way that people are theorizing around the various vectors in which we need to think about AI and equity, in terms of access to use of AI, in terms of whose data is used and how they're compensated and how bias is addressed. What is transparent? I mean, I was listening to one talk the other day about, right, like AI necessarily being a black box, right? How do we scrutinize and how do we manage that black box? As an educator, right? I teach first year writing, or at least I have for the last several years, right? Like, this is an amazing thing, and this is a nightmare. But what it does is it allows us to ask, what the heck are we meant to be educating for? And what is writing for? And how are we using it? And those are really scary questions to be asking, but they're also really exciting ones. So I do think, using social media as just one example, I think issues of equity, I think issues of transparency, I think, issues of regulation. And like Switzerland is doing some interesting things. We will be hosting our third salon this year in Brussels, and hope to have some participation from folks from the European Commission on AI, where there's a sort of a very different approach than here in the US. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your whole question.
No, thank you. Thank you. Provides a lot of insight into how we learn from how we move forward in a really conscious way. And I'm gonna throw it over to Tina for one last question before we jump into general questions.
Yeah, thank you. So one of the things that just keeps coming forward for me, I can't help it, and I know that consciousness awakening is not well, I don't know the research around it or not, but I can't help but see how all of this points to something that feels very true in my own lived experience, which being somebody who didn't have a religious or spiritual background, and then at 33 all of a sudden had spiritual awakenings and have a very different worldview now as a result of
Mhm.
that and the integration path it sent me on. um I can't help but think of the both and around, like, in yogic traditions, um like the reason that you do the postures and the reason that you do the breath work is that so you can sit in meditation, and when you sit in meditation and you practice and you practice and you practice, then you're basically, to some extent, living the intention that you're open to an awakened experience when it is meant for, when your popcorn kernel is hot enough to pop, I suppose. And so part of all of this is like just a very curious thing within me around, like, this greater planetary awakening that might be transpiring that's probably needed. I absolutely love Daniel Schmachtenberger offered the analogy of um, when a chick is about to peck out.
Okay.
We were afraid that was going to happen. It held out almost 50 minutes.
Okay. When the
But when
chick is about to peck.
about to peck out, and then
Yeah.
um, that it has the highest level of waste and the lowest level of food left. And so, we don't know, we can't be in a
Mm,
chick's brain. We don't
yeah.
know what that is like. Um, but the observed reality is that the only choice is to peck out of the known worldview and to open
Yes.
up fundamentally into an entirely new worldview. And so whatever we want
Yes.
to call that, it is very curious to me because our current worldview is not going to hold us on this planet. If we continue to do the damage we're doing, we're not going to be able to be here for that much longer. And so part of all of this, it is including the conversation that you were just having about AI in response to Trace's question, is like, how are these conversations about, for example, a more intentional AI and a taking a better go at it than we did, just to use simplistic terms, with the internet? How much of that is sitting on the yoga mat and doing the breath work and doing the
Mhm.
postures, so
Mhm.
that at one point in time, hopefully when the collective is ready enough, we can steward something that works a lot better for all of us than we were able to pull off with, the first few versions of the internet, or more specifically social media. I think that's a really good distinction. It's not the internet in general, the big bad wolf. There's the way that social media plays out for one's attention. um, so I'm curious if you just have a reflection
Mhm.
on that, and then you're welcome to transition into, we would love to hear about what human energy is up to now and how people can stay in touch and participate as well.
Sure. I will try to keep this brief. I mean, I think one concept I wanted to throw out there that I didn't get a chance to raise earlier, but I just want to pin on the wall there, is the technosocial dilemma, which is a term that human energy uses to talk about the impact of the exponential pace of technological change, and the fact that our institutions and our practices and our psyches I can't keep up. And so we offer this third story, and noospheric thought and practice as an antidote and as a response to the techno-social dilemma, to understand that we are in fact in charge of technology and that collectively we have the power to shape it for our flourishing future, that we are not simply victims of some alien force, that we are driving this planet Earth spaceship. And I think what you're talking about, resonates for me in terms of fostering collective thinking, noospheric awareness, thinking globally and at a planetary scale. All of those things are practices that we can't simply say, okay, we need to fix AI and make it, better for humans without bringing that planetary, that collective, that collaborative, that integrative approach. We need to evolve as we are doing this in order to do the task that's called for, which is, and I really love that chick metaphor as well. I mean, I remember Brian Swim saying, I feel like we're on the verge of a major planetary transition, and it is awful to be in this space, right? We're at maximum waste and minimum food. And we've got to break through, because this cannot continue.
Yeah.
And then you asked me to talk a little bit about what human energy is doing. So I'll be really quick. And just say we're a project-based organization rather than a program-based one, at least at this point in our history. So we have a number of projects in the work. We're shifting more and more towards educational projects. So we currently have a project called Curriculum Crosswalks, where we have mapped the national science standards, or mapped our Noosphere content onto the national science standards. And we're starting workshops on this next week with science teachers from around the country, who will be a second round of testing out this material in their classrooms and giving us feedback. And we're aiming to develop a national network of science teachers who are engaging with the Noosphere in ways that serve their purposes to meet national science standards and do engineering projects that are noospheric in perspective and whatnot. So that's one thing we're doing. We've launched this year, we're not doing a conference right now. We've launched instead a global salon series, and we're hosting these intimate, really special events at exciting locations around the world, where we're bringing together thought leaders, not only from across disciplines, but from across sectors. So from business and tech and the arts and science and philosophy, into conversation for panels, but also to really create an energized and meaningful conversation in the room. And then the panels themselves are recorded and live streamed. So we did our first one in New York in June. You can find the live stream of that discussion, which was on human energy for work and life, cultivating agency, connection, and purpose in the age of AI, on our YouTube channel. We have an extensive YouTube channel. The one we do in the Bay Area will likely be aligned with this other project we're developing, the documentary, that is looking at AI as potentially part of a major evolutionary transition, and looking at evolutionary science and history as a way to inform how we approach that today for a positive, humane noosphere for the future. And then we'll do, as I mentioned, our third one in Brussels, and we'll see where that goes from there. We have a book under development on the concept of human energy. And actually, when we're talking about safety earlier, Tina, I just wanted to point to one of our little shorts from the New York salon. You can find it on YouTube. Is about it's David Sloan Wilson, and he's talking about laughter and the relationship between laughter, safety, and freeing up the capacity to build and to create new possibilities as humans when we feel safe together, because we have shared, collectively addressed our fundamental needs for safety and security and food and shelter and whatnot. So those are just a few of the things we have in the works. We're a global network of partners and consultants. And at Human Energy, we're not about kind of applying the noosphere to solve specific global problems, but we're about partnering with others who are doing that kind of work and helping bring a conceptual framework, a story, and a deep scientific basis for this particular approach that we think is necessary to solve those planetary scale problems.
I love it. Thank you so much for all of that. And thank you for everything that Human Energy is doing and will do and has done. I know Trace and I have already benefited significantly by binging a bit of the YouTube channel. And it's like this work is, as you well know, because you've poured your heart and soul and time into it, but it is so much what the planet needs right now. So I want to honor our time container. We are at time. Do you have a couple extra minutes for questions?
I totally do. I can hang around if
Awesome.
people want to stay and ask
Okay,
questions. But I understand others may need to leave as well.
we'll put like a 10-minute cap on it so that we're reasonable. But Joel has asked in the comments, and if anyone else has questions, go ahead and add them to the chat. If the noosphere is a planetary intelligence, how might we as humans cultivate a greater capacity to hear what the planet wants to say?
Mm, mm. Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the things we can do is create spaces and practices where we listen to each other across all kinds of differences. We humans, I mean, one way of thinking also about the evolution of the noosphere is that it advanced when humans made their way around the entire planet, right? Like we didn't start out covering the planet. We became a planetary force. We need to talk to each other around the planet and across our deepest differences, to create spaces for meaningful connection and dialogue, to prioritize relationship as an antidote to fragmentation and isolation and anxiety, to develop an awareness of our interconnectedness. I think another practice is storytelling, right? Like we need stories that help us understand that we are and to feel part of something larger and more meaningful as a species, as a part of the planet, as a part of a planetary, as a part of the biosphere, right? And I'm often struck by the number of dystopian futuristic visions there are out there. I mean, just like on Netflix, right? Like if you want to watch something sci-fi or futuristic, like it's dark. And I understand and appreciate that these risks are real, but who is out there and how can we promote visions of what we actually want to come to be? And those visions, I think, yeah, need to be informed by listening to the earth. I saw a great conversation bit somewhere, probably on social media, where someone was like, if you listen to the earth, what is it saying to you? Right? And the responses were really different. Some of them were, aching, but many of them were, oh, you foolish children. It will be okay. I'm not going anywhere. You may go somewhere, but I'm not going anywhere. So I think understanding our history, our place, and imagining our future with this planet and with each other, because that's, leaving for some other planet is not a future I want to imagine and work for.
No, me neither. There are so many moments of beauty and awe. And, as I've navigated life and grief processes, there's some times where those moments seem maybe further apart from each other, but more impactful maybe because the lacking or the gap. And then there's other times where it's like awe is available in any I can look at. There's a hummingbird that chose to build her nest on our little wind chime at our front door. And not only did she already successfully have two babies leave the nest, she came back for another brood this same season. And I'm just like, us here? You trust
Mm.
us. Like,
Yeah,
this
what a
is
blessing.
incredible. So it's
Yeah,
it's all around us if we choose to honor it and live in reverence.
mm,
Okay, I'll toss the one last question that's in the chat and then thank you so much for your time.
sure.
Is there an element of the noosphere
Mm,
conversation that scales to the universe? Kind of goes along board with how, at least as humans, I'm not interested in living on another planet. Maybe in another
sure.
lifetime or another
Yeah,
iteration of
yeah,
myself.
yeah, yeah,
I.e., we as humans are the universe aware of itself, experiencing itself.
yeah. That's a really interesting question. And it takes me back to, I've mentioned my colleague Brian Swim. Some folks may know his Emmy Award-winning Journey of the Universe video. I think Brian would say yes. The noospherics we're promoting it as a new scientific field, and like all new scientific fields, it's not unified, right? Like there's different takes on it. We're putting forward theories and ideas and testing them out. I think um, I think given that it is likely that there is intelligent life on some other planet somewhere, but the chances that we will make connection with that other intelligence are incredibly slim. I don't know that the human noosphere could claim to be the universe aware of itself. We could perhaps evolve in the deep future to multiple noospheres converging, right? That would be a higher form. That would be a major evolutionary transition towards a higher form of complexity and communication. But that's beyond what we have theorized at this point. I will say, like you, I mean, understanding my own location and connection, not just to the planet, but to the cosmos, is essential to my experience of the noosphere, right? Like we are doing something special in the cosmos, and we are deeply connected. I mean, my one of my moments of spiritual transcendence was just looking up at the night sky and feeling my brain open up, literally like a can opener or something, and sensing that connection to every one of those nodes of power and light, and potentially life out there. So it's a little
Some
esoteric,
version of,
but
I love it. Some version of that brain exploding emoji.
yeah, yeah.
Trace, last thought?
Yeah, I mean, I have a bunch of questions, but I think for the sake of time, real quickly, are there a couple practical things that we can do to support the
Mhm.
emergence of a healthy noosphere?
Yeah, I mean, I think to engage with others and help others understand the task that lies before us and the opportunity that lies before us. So at Human Energy, we are, about spreading the story. right? About bringing others into this awareness, this understanding, in order to empower people to work together, um, to uh, to evolve our ourselves, our species, and to solve our planetary scale problems. So I think spreading the good news, right? Like this
Mhm.
is my evangelical background speaking, right? Tell the story, share your testimony, all those things. And my experience has been in it's not something that typically over a cup of coffee somebody gets, right? But um, sharing ideas, inviting people into conversation. And there's plenty of ways you can connect with human energy. Visit our YouTube channel, visit our website, sign up for our newsletter, join our Discord channel, um, express your interest in attending one of our salon events around the world or other events. Volunteer to help us with one of our projects. Like there's lots of ways you can engage directly with us in the work we're doing to evolve the noosphere, but we also understand that work to be happening all over the place. And so when we host salons, we invite people to then host their own satellite salon, and we provide resources to help them do that, to do the work in their own communities.
I love that. Thank you so much. Thank you for your generosity of time and
My pleasure.
spirit. I just cannot thank you enough for being a human who is willing to be brave enough in this time of human history to connect your mind to your heart, to your spirit and your whole being, and to share that generously with the world, because I think above all that is the ripple effect creation of a healthy noosphere.
Mm.
So thank you, Dr. Sheila. I really appreciate your time. For everybody who's joined us today, really appreciate all of your time and energy being in this container. Even though your particular words may not have been your thoughts were part of this mini noosphere that we got to create today. And so thank you for that. We'll end on that note. It's 11:11, so it just feels right. And we wish everybody to have a wonderful rest of the day and week. Take care.